Hello, Mr. Stoffer.
Hiya.
Can you do me a solid and make me a co-host tonight?
Yes. I mean to do it every time. For September 21. We've got a little bit of a switch on our agenda this evening. We're going to do the Water Master Plan before we do the Kellogg Good Neighbor Committee conversation. And I'll say it now just so that I don't forget later. Following the work session, we will go into a executive session pursuant to Oregon Revised Statute ORS 192.6602E to conduct deliberations with persons designated by the governing body to negotiate real property transactions. All right, now that I've done my legal duties, water master planning.
Thank you, Mayor Gamba, Council President Heisey, and council members. I'm Peter Passarelli. I'm the Public Works Director for the City of Milwaukee, and this afternoon I've got Brian Murphy from Tetra Tech, and we're going to provide an update on our water master plan. So similar to our wastewater master plan, which you received an update in early August, we began this project back in the spring of 2019. There was some collaboration with both the wastewater and the water master plan and our planning department on looking at the planning scenarios to make sure that we were being consistent across the board on how we were looking at these utilities and the impacts that that growth was going to have, potential growth would have on the utilities. So we spent a lot of time going through that process and developing what those scenarios were going to look like. So I've invited Brian here this afternoon to give us an update on the master plan. We're pretty much in about the same point that we were in the master plan. We've gone through and have done condition assessments and built a hydraulic model for our utility, looked at how the system would be impacted by the growth scenarios. And then we've developed a capital improvement plan, a draft plan there that we're still going through and sorting and trying to see how that integrates with our current CIP and our SAVE program and those things. So we've got a little bit of work to do. Brian was just mentioning before we started that he had sent another draft of the CIP spreadsheet for Jen Garbley and I to take a look at this afternoon. So with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over to Brian to get started. And as he's pulling up the presentation, one of the things that we did find going through here that our master planning effort is that there's some deficiencies, both as they relate to storage and pumping capacity as we build out and develop our community. And Brian's capture those deficiencies in the plan. We've also realized as we've gone through here, and I think I've mentioned it before in other presentations, over the past 30 or so years on the water side, the city has really sort of deferred investment on its production and treatment components of its system. So where we're pumping water out of the wells and how we treat the water at the treatment plants that we haven't probably invested as we should have over that time period. So, we've been working on lots of different projects. Our SCADA project's one that we're doing. Our well number 2, we're building a new well for number 2. And we've got a Stanley storage reservoir project as well that we've got in our current CIP. Brian's actually identified, and the team's identified some additional projects as well. So, Brian.
All right. Well, thank you, Peter. I appreciate having the opportunity to come and talk to everybody today about this, primarily because if I'm talking to you, that means we are oh so close to having this done. And as Peter said, we started in 2019, and these master plans with all the moving parts take time for them all to come together and coalesce, and we're finally getting to that point. So it's pretty exciting. All right, let me share my screen here. Can everyone see that now? Okay. All right. So this is the 2021 master plan that I wanted to share with you today as to where we are, as I said, at the end of it and what we're finding. So this is an update to the 2010 master plan, which is a good time frame. Somewhere in that 8 to 10 year range is a good time to update a master plan. Primarily because once, as you see, what comes out of this, the real usable document at the end is that capital improvement plan. And in all reality, those estimates on those projects are pretty accurate to the 5-year mark. From the 5 to 10 year mark, they get a little bit more squishy. And beyond that, it's really kind of a guess, and really is at the time where they should be updated again because priorities change, projects have been moved around, it gets kind of messy again, so it's time to order things again. So, you'd be looking at doing this again in 2028, 2030 type timeframe. The planning horizon for this is 2040, so it is a 20-year planning horizon. Again, so it breaks that up into chunks of annually for the first 10 years, and we do 2 5-year chunks in that final CIP. As Peter said, we coordinated this with the wastewater master plan, really around the population figures and the demand figures, because it's important. I've seen so often that these plans don't happen at the same time, and you get different population figures that you're using and different planning areas, and it's hard to compare apples to apples between the two systems. So early on, we really coordinated with WSC doing the wastewater master plan. We incorporated those planning projections or population growth projections that were done by Angelo Planning Group. And that was important because Milwaukie really falls into not just Milwaukie, but a city like Milwaukie falls into a gray area for population planning because the Portland State Population Center looks at the metropolitan area as a whole and doesn't pull out the individual cities. And the county planning uses a slightly different method, and it's the Portland State one that is the recognized numbers. So on the wastewater side and the water side, we use those Angelo projections and the assumptions that were used in there. Now, in terms of doing this, why doing this? There isn't necessarily a statutory regulatory requirement to do master planning in Oregon. However, if you're going to look for or submit or apply for additional water rights or make changes to your system, or looking for funding options, an updated master plan is required. And it's a best management practice. It really provides you the information that you need as a council and Peter needs as a utility manager to organize what work needs to be done in the system. Excuse me. Planning elements, I won't go through all these. It starts with an executive summary, and we begin to build through system description, planning data, building the hydraulic model. We look at source of supply, how the system is performing in terms of regulatory compliance. We look at the operation and maintenance program. New in the new master plans that are, when you do a master plan, what a new piece that is required for the state of Oregon is this natural hazard resiliency assessment, which is new, as well as what's wrapped up in there is a seismic resiliency assessment of the water system assets. So that's new to this master plan. And then finally, the capital improvement plan was where we pulled together what projects and what capital investment needs to be done in the system. And then there's a section on, utility rates and CIP funding. This time for this, we did not include the financial analysis as part of the water master plan. I believe, Peter, that was done separately where rates were evaluated and things like that. So that's not part of this plan.
We had done that beforehand, and then we're going to be, I think we had mentioned in the spring when we were talking about SDCs that we're looking at doing a new financial analysis and SDC analysis.
So in presenting this, it comes out to 9 chapters, 63 summary tables, 55 figures, and 16 appendices that anyone should be able to reference to get a comprehensive picture of the city's water system.
Brian, could I mention one other thing back on
please.
on that other slide on that natural hazard resiliency assessment? One of the other things that we did do is we included an assessment of climate impacts as well in there. So
yeah, and we'll touch on that. All right, so the planning area, obviously it's the Milwaukee city limits. The population that came out of the Angelo, the current population, 20,219 residents. And of those 20,000 plus residents, there are 7,870 service accounts on the water system. There's also 2 dual interest areas that initially were included in the counts up here and correct me, Peter, if I'm wrong, the northeast corner and the southeast corner that are served by, it's a mix of the city and Clackamas River water. Ultimately, we pulled those out of the population figures and the service area when we looked at some storage and pumping issues. So this is the service area, and it reflects the 4 pressure zones that we'll be talking about later too. The main pressure zone, the largest part of the system in pink, which is pressure zone number 2, and then blue is 1, green is 3, and yellow is zone 4.
I would like to point out, one of the important pieces related to that dual interest area discussion there, similar to the discussion we had several weeks ago with Oak Lodge. So, Oak Lodge already has existing infrastructure in place on the boundaries of the city. And in some cases, they're serving residents in the community and vice versa. The same thing applies in some of these dual interest areas. And, in many of these areas, it just doesn't make financial sense to build additional infrastructure to pick off residential customers that somebody else is already providing that service for. So we asked Brian during this analysis to relook that and pull those out because the impacts of serving that would be a significant financial burden on our current customers.
Can I?
Yep.
Just to clarify that, so the dual interest area in the Northeast is the one that I'm most familiar with, and that sort of was driven by sewer access.
Right.
So we're not, I mean, they are connecting to our sewer when they annex, but not necessarily to our water. Is that what you're saying?
It depends, but yes, they're connecting to our sewer, and they may be connected to water in some circumstances because we have existing infrastructure there that we built. But we're not looking to build new infrastructure to serve some residential customers there because they're already being provided water from another utility provider.
And so I remember, I mean, I have this vague recollection of a Southeast one, but I didn't know exactly what it was or what was in it.
It's like Cherokee Farms, for example. So
Okay.
when we annex that property in, we're managing and taking care of the sewer collection, but CRW is the water provider there.
Okay. Well, that was something I was going to point out about this map. I mean, the over here on the left, it says city limits, but it's not showing Cherokee Farms. So that's because it's not, I mean, it is in the city limits now, but it's not part of the. Okay.
That is something that, we've actually addressed in the document of comments that need to get.
Yeah, I think that was my oversight. That should more accurately say Milwaukie Water System Service Area,
Okay.
rather than city limits.
Yeah, so these are our pressure zones that we're showing there. So.
Okay. All right. Water system physical assets. So you're aware of what's really out there and what the utility group is doing, because these are buried. And let's face it, out of sight, out of mind for largely water and wastewater utilities a lot of the time. There's 6,900 service meters. So of those 7,800 accounts, they're served through 6,900 service meters. There's 3,000 valves, nearly 800 hydrants, 100 miles of pipeline, 36 pumps. PRVs are pressure reducing valves that reduce the pressure from higher elevations to lower elevations. Certainly you have your wells. The more critical things, the reservoirs, the 3 reservoirs, and we'll talk about the recommendation we have for the 4th reservoir coming up. Certainly the treatment facilities and the transfer pump stations and the booster pump stations, which are very important in the Milwaukie system, as we'll see in a schematic a little bit later, of being able to move water around the system, because they do create some pinch points.
Can you explain how we have 900 more accounts than meters? What is that?
Multi-family residences. So these, I'll back up. So these are service accounts. So these are accounts that you bill to. You may have you have fewer meters. Like you may only have 1 meter that goes into an apartment building. So depending on how that's structured through the billing, you may have more accounts for each apartment, but it's only serviced through 1 meter. But you're muted there.
So they get billed proportionally from the meter?
That often depends on the agreement between, and maybe Peter could address that, is how it's handled with multifamily accounts.
Yeah, I mean, generally in the multifamily accounts, in the apartments that we have, there's a master meter, perhaps to each of the buildings, for example, and each, the residents there are billed according to a prorated rate, like you said, from their landlord.
I've seen instances on these multifamily setups before where there's a master meter that the city that the city is responsible for. Then following that meter, there may be individual meters that the property owner than read to determine how, things might be proportioned out. So that's where that difference comes in.
Another question.
Mhm.
On the pressure relief valves, I'm reading about some cities that are utilizing that to hydroelectric, which apparently spills the pressure also. Have we explored that in any of these mains?
I have had some very preliminary discussions with one of the firms that does that is working on those types of projects in the Pacific Northwest. Honestly, it's something that's hasn't been a priority, but we have had discussions about it. There are some opportunities there, but it's limited in terms of how much energy that we're going to produce from those inline generators that they're able to put into the pipes. But we have had some discussions as late as this previous spring here. So.
Generally speaking, probably in the last 10 years, there's been a lot of excitement around what they're called micro turbines. And realistically, they require a pretty significant hydraulic head to generate the electricity necessary to pay for themselves. And really, typically, they don't often pencil out. Technically, they could work. I mean, you can put a micro turbine in just about any pipe, but whether or not it's going to generate enough electricity to pay for itself and its operation and maintenance is usually where it often kind of falls apart.
Thanks.
And I'm not sure, just based on my experience, if there's any head drops in the Milwaukie system that would be significant enough to make that something really pay out. But Peter would know better.
We're continuing to watch the pilot project that PGE and Hillsborough are doing together on that very thing too.
Okay. Is that, I'll get sidetracked with my own questions, so I'll stop there. Condition assessments. Overall condition assessment, when we look at, we do on-site visits. We don't delve deep into it, but get a general sense of the overall condition of the assets. All the assets are operational. That's good news. That's not always the case, so that's good. As Peter mentioned, there is a fair amount of deferred capital investment that is reflected in the CIP. There are some, and these are minor, obsolete, non-functioning, or missing equipment. These are things on the level of, eye wash stations or obsolete types of mercury switches and things like that just need to be changed out. They're not large capital investment items, but there are some of those things there in some of the pump stations and such. The operational control coordination, as Peter mentioned, is currently being addressed by the SCADA upgrades. So that is underway. And I know in the CIP that we've included really something that everyone needs to get their heads around is SCADA and internet technologies and computers are just something we have to pay for on an ongoing basis. It's really not something you can drop a bunch of money at every 10 years. It's really an ongoing investment at a personal level, at a utility level, a business level. There is a need for dedicated chlorine rooms. Now, there's also discussion of one of the recommendations for the treatment plants of converting from gas chlorine to sodium hypochlorite. And if that occurs with that changeover, the need for these individual chlorine rooms then goes away. So that will kind of depend on the direction that's taken. And probably one to be aware of here is that 50% of the distribution system is more than 50 years old, the age of those pipes. And where an asset management plan or much like the SCADA and IT in investing on an annual basis through replace those pipes in advance of their failing is just somewhat of an ongoing necessity that has not been the standard practice in the past. A lot of utilities, and even still, will still practice operate till failure. That typically what the data has shown is more expensive because you're paying crews overtime. They're out there at nighttime. You have customers that are angry because their water has been turned off unexpectedly, rather than replacing that pipe in a scheduled manner. So that's something to keep aware of, so that peak, or when those pipes get to an age that they may start to fail, that you don't see 50% of the system failing in a tight time frame. So again, something that is addressed in the CIP. If you haven't seen this before, this is an overall schematic of the water system. Some key features here I wanted to point out. You can see the 4 zones, pressure zones that we talked about, 1, 2, 3, and 4. 2 is certainly the largest zone. What a key feature of the Milwaukie system is, while we have storage for each one of the zones, or at least 3 of the 4 zones, we don't have a lot of ability to cross over from zone to zone, which is what we'll see again when we talk about the storage analysis and why there's a need for a 4th reservoir, because we don't have that ability to shift. System-wide, the storage capacity is okay, but within individual zones, there's a deficit. Also in the CIP, there's a recommendation for upgrading this W2 pump station, as well as, where's the other one, Peter? The W6 pump station. And that's because this W2 pump station, as you can see, it's somewhat of a pinch point, because water to zone 2 has to come through the concrete reservoir. And the only way to get it from the concrete reservoir up to the elevated storage is through that pump station. So there's some redundancy and capacity issues in that pump station that are addressed in the capital improvement plan as well. Demand allocation, we broke this down. You can see the total demand. We look back in these master plans on the previous 5 years worth of data to kind of get a historical picture. Is pretty consistent in demand. It dropped off somewhat in 2016-17 fiscal year. It's come back up. It's right around 700 million gallons a year that the city uses. Most of that, or the largest proportion of it, comes from residential use, then commercial use, and then the multifamily residences. So, which this reflects, the situation in Milwaukie. It is primarily a residential community. And that's where most of the demand is.
And that commercial use also includes industrial customers.
Yes, yeah. Production, demand, and loss, that's always another thing that we want to look at. Again, because the loss figure comes into play when you're looking for additional water or funding for upgrades. So the production, we're right here, that's up there pretty close to the 800 million gallons a year, like we obviously saw in the demand, a little more than that. This is the consumption, obviously, a little less than that. And the difference between those two is the loss. And that loss, the numbers now, they were higher in 2015, 2016, but some of the activities and pipeline replacement that have taken place have dropped that below the 10%. And I don't remember the exact number, Peter. I think it's like 8.5% to 9% loss,
right?
Which is below the industry threshold. That threshold is really at 10%. And the reason you might think it's like, well, we're still losing 10% of our water. The reason the industry standard is set there is because below that, it doesn't pay for itself. You're really chasing small leaks at that point. They can be difficult to find and difficult to fix. And again, they really don't pay for themselves. So anything below 10% is considered an acceptable loss. So that's good news as well, that is gotten below there. And again, with repairing some of those older pipes and some of the other improvements in the CIP, should continue to drop that number, at least maintain that number.
And I would say, maybe another term you could consider using too is unallocated water usage. So, some of the water, perhaps, there's fire flow testing, there's fires at the water, we're not billing for those sorts of things. There's, when we go out and we flush water mains, those are things that we don't get revenue for when we're doing those sorts of things. So
and there's a
water main breaks.
Yeah, there's a much more detailed analysis you can do in water loss, as Peter said, that gets to accounted water, unaccounted for water, stolen water, which if this number had been higher, if it had been higher than the 10%, I probably would have recommended to Peter that we start looking at and say, okay, how is that loss really characterized? But since we're below that point, again, it didn't really justify itself. But if that starts to come back up, that could be something that the city look at. It's like, where is that what is considered unaccounted for water, which takes into everything that falls between production and build. And as Peter said, there's uses in there that are billed for in some cases. So it's good to identify those if the numbers get too close. Population, these always go up. You can see the population where we are here, just above 20,000 in 2019. By 2040, based on the Angelo planning numbers, Milwaukie is looking at basically doubling their population over the next 20 years. Now, this was, Angelo had done a series of different scenarios. And the one that, after discussion with Peter and the staff, this is the one that we selected to base our other planning data on. There are others that went higher or lower, but this was kind of a middle ground conservative estimate in terms of population growth.
Well, I think this was what we ended up choosing, similar to the wastewater, was where we were allowing, residential densification throughout the community, and we had the neighborhood hubs being constructed. Yeah,
that's exactly, and you'll see in here too, if you're not familiar with the term ERUs, ERUs is what we use to compare apples to apples. Then the way we come up with that is we take all of the residential demand, the single family residential demand, and divide that by the number of accounts to come up with, typically that number is probably 150 to 200 gallons per day per customer. So that equals 1 ERU. So if we have 1 ERU equals 200 gallons per day, then we take that to, say, an industrial user that may be using, for example, 100,000 gallons a day. That would equate to 50 ERUs. So it allows us to compare apples to apples instead of, trying to. It's a tool that OHA uses to equalize the data so that they're talking the same numbers. So you know what that is if you come across it. Again, we're looking for average day demand and maximum day demands. A maximum day demand, this is typically a summer demand, is projected to go from 400,000 or 4 million gallons a day up to a little less than 7 million gallons a day. So that's good news. So as you compare up here, our population is projected to double, but our demand is not projected to double. And that's through conservation measures and new plumbing standards and things like that, or any conservation measures that the city might put in place, or how aggressive you want to be with those conservation measures can affect that number.
And Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, but that also includes not including the dual interest areas as part of our
Yes. The dual interest areas, when we got into this population and demand forecasting, were pulled out of the numbers. So they are not included in the demand projections.
So does it include any of the undeveloped areas in our UGMA? Or are we just going to assume that whoever's serving those portions of the UGMA will continue to serve them, and that's not our problem?
Well, I think there were a couple areas on the eastern border that we kept in that were undeveloped. But generally, if there's already a utility that's providing water to that neighborhood or that property, then that utility was going to continue to provide that service.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there were a couple areas.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that there were even areas that were of significance that if they came in, it's not going to sway these numbers in any visible manner. So for all intents and purposes, Mr. Mayor, yeah, you're looking at the existing service area with a few little decimal points in changes possibly. Storage and pumping deficiencies. This is as part of this plan, we took the hydraulic model. We did some substantial work in updating the hydraulic model and matching it with the the GIS database to make sure, and did a lot. I know that Peter's staff did a lot of cleanup on the model about midway through the project. So the model that the city has now is an accurate reflection of the distribution system. But in running the analyses for pumping and storage analysis, you can see what I referred to here as system-wide, and the column to the left or to the right, you can see system-wide there isn't a storage deficit until 2040. But that can be misleading because it's difficult to get water across these zones. So more importantly, we need to look at what is the deficit in each one of the zones. So in zones 1 and 4 and in zones 2, you can see even though it's mild, there's already a deficit now. And that deficit grows. In zones 1 and 4, it doesn't grow a lot because those zones are small compared to the storage that's available. But the growth is more substantial in zone 2, being that there's a single tank right now with the elevated tank, and it's the largest pressure zone.
So these are Brian, planning level deficiencies. So
yes.
Yes. You're looking at the maximum peak hour demand, and you have a fire at the same time.
Yes. Right. So these reflect, and thank you, Peter. You could think of as a worst case scenario. The reason you're not seeing any deficiencies or things popping up now is because you're not having a large fire in the zone during August when everyone's watering their lawn type thing, or it's at 8 o'clock in the morning when everybody's getting ready for work. There's a big fire in zone 2. Then you might see some things and pressures dropping and things like that, or storage dropping below where you'd want it to drop, or would you're comfortable at dropping. So that's very important to keep in mind. So the result of this in the CIP is a recommendation for a 4th storage tank in the system. And I know that Peter and Jen have begun talking about that. We went through these numbers quite a bit. And I think that this is part of the impetus for taking out some of those dual service areas of the population, because those areas would have added a significant number of, or a significant demand on the system that would drive for even more storage, a greater storage need in the near future. Pumping was a similar issue. Again, these these are taken based on a worst case scenario. And in addition to the worst case scenario with a peak hourly demand and fire flow, you have to evaluate this based on OHA's guidelines with the largest pump out of service. So it really shows some deficiencies, and why you can see now we have the pumps that are here are all under 1,000 gallon per minute pumps, where what we're recommending for W6 and W2 are the addition of two 3,000 gallon per minute pumps and 2,000 gallon per minute pumps. And that's because of that analysis of having the largest pump out of service and still being able to meet your demand.
I have a question sort of about the worst case scenario concept. You know, how we talk about you shouldn't build the Kmart parking lot for Black Friday, right? Because the rest of the year it's going to sit empty and just make a lot of heat. We've got interties with what, 2 or 3 different other providers. Does it potentially, I'm just playing devil's advocate here, does it potentially make more sense to make those more responsive or quick or whatever, so that they can be utilized at a moment's notice rather than the sort of 3-day period? It seems, I don't know how long it takes, but it always seems like it's a process, right?
Yeah.
Rather than spending a whole bunch of money putting in pumps that the only time, or pumps or storage for that matter, that the only time we're going to need it is if it's the hottest day of the summer and everybody's watering and there's a fire and.
Yeah, well, I would, and that's a good point, Mr. Mayor, and I would add to that or respond to that by while I'm calling it a worst case scenario, there are other elements built into that analysis to prevent just that. Even at the state level and on an engineering level, you're absolutely right. We don't want to build a tank to meet maximum demand and still have maximum operability. So there are other things that are built into there that these numbers really reflect what is needed to operate the system comfortably. If that makes more sense. So what we're proposing here isn't, let's put, 10 million gallons of storage in the system because more is better and we have it. This is just to be able to give you an acceptable operational buffer in the system. Does that make a little bit more sense? Now, the issue with the interties, I'm going to touch on that pretty just quickly too, is there are interties there. Part of an issue with the interties, and we didn't go into the detail in this master plan, is the different waters. Those interties are there for emergency interties. In a case like that, it's better to have some water than no water. But on a regular operational basis, and depending on how you might use those interties, the differing water qualities can potentially wreak havoc, long-term havoc in a system by bringing in, for example, surface waters into your predominantly groundwater fed system.
Yeah, so when you're mixing waters that have different pHs, so our groundwater is generally going to have a higher pH than the surface waters from CRW, Oak Lodge, or Portland, and Portland and CRW being the 2 interties that we currently have. You can certainly have issues when those water mix, where they hit together and mix and have some significant scaling deposition inside the system that can cause problems. That can be pretty immediate. So depending on the differences in pH. So we do need to be careful there with that.
And you can only bring that water in so fast. If from that first map, the city's storage is primarily in the center of the city, especially in Zone 2. It's essentially in the center of town. So in order to bring enough water to that storage system, you're going to have to upgrade the pump stations. And you're probably going to have to upsize pipelines to get the water there. So in which case, even more so, you're upsizing pipelines and pump stations only for an ultimate emergency, which may never happen, but as opposed to regular operational needs and capacities that you need. Really, the issue on especially on the storage is the capacity of the storage. If you're using that water that quickly, what you're going to see is pressures in the pressure zone, service pressures drop below an acceptable a regulatory level of 20 psi. As opposed to, and that's what drives our recommendations on the distribution system, is under conditions that have to be met, those pipe sizes, you would see a drop in pressure at service connections. So I guess I would leave it with that. Is while I'm using the term worst case scenario, it's not, there are other elements and details built in, not presented here, that that go into that. So we don't have exactly what you're concerned with.
Okay, thanks.
Does that answer? Okay. Source of supply, really the city's source of supply is quite good. There's no need for the application of additional water rights at this time. It's always good to continue to evaluate that as population grows, you know, every 5 years or so, to take a look at it and see if things are progressing along the path that was anticipated. And with communities like Milwaukie, if you're not going to be taking on large areas and gobbling up a lot of properties, then your service area, the things should progress along projections, because you don't have any areas within the city where you can just have large developments like you might see on more western or eastern communities where there's a lot of place to expand on the edges of the community. Currently, your water rights exceed your operational and treatment capacities. So the pinch point isn't on what's available, it's how much you can treat and get out to your customers.
I do have a question about that, though. You say it's not a problem with our water rights, but has there been a look at the geology of the aquifer and what charges that aquifer? And as we're seeing climate change occur, if say a lot of that charging is coming from snowmelt off Hood, for example,
yeah,
to make something up, and we expect that to be reduced dramatically over the next 20, 30 years, do we have any risk in the aquifer starting to become deplenished, or at least, you know, the well is not reaching it anymore?
Yeah. Well, with your permission, if I could table that for like 2 slides from now.
Perfect.
We'll get to all that. So your existing condition and the existing aquifer, the Troutdale aquifer that you're in is a very good aquifer. It's good quality water. So like I said, the source itself is good, and the water that you have the rights to is good. And we'll get to, you can have rights to water, but if the water's not there, what are they worth? And well number 8 is now being reevaluated or evaluated for rehabilitation, which would bring another well online to help access more of that water that you have the rights to.
So I just wanted to add a piece on that. And Brian, we've got about like 10 minutes.
Okay, yeah, okay.
So on well number 8, the city received some recommendations for rehabilitation of that well back in 2013, actually. We had some issues with some iron bacteria growth in the well. And I really have never been able to find a really good answer on why we didn't follow through with those recommendations, which included going through and doing a video evaluation of the well and doing a chemical and mechanical cleaning of the well. So we've reevaluated that, and one of the things that we're going to be doing is going through and trying to rehab that well in the next couple of years and bring that back up online, because a new well is going to cost us about $2 million. So as opposed to $250,000 to rehab it. So.
Sorry about that. I clicked where I shouldn't have clicked. I should have left well enough alone. All right. So the seismic resiliency, that's another piece of this that's now required in the Oregon plans. When you do a master plan, to look at the resiliency of the system. We identified 3 issues, one that we considered high and 2 of medium importance. The high was certainly the Stanley Reservoir, and it has an insufficient freeboard and anchorage on the tank that can cause, as water sloshes in a tank in a seismic event, it can cause damage to the roof or cause the tank to slide off its foundation. It has rigid piping connections, and there's a risk of damage from uncontrolled loss, and what that simply means is a catastrophic failure. I know that we've recommended this, but Peter, if you want to touch on, you already have some of these things underway for Stanley Reservoir.
Yeah, we do. We have a CIP project for 2023. We've got a project that's been designed that includes making these seismic upgrades to the reservoir. We moved it to 23, 24 to sort of smooth out the cost to our residents, so we didn't have a big impact over the last couple of years within our CIP. So we do have a project that actually WSC has put together. So
the next one is the concrete reservoir. This we felt a little lower on the urgency. There's the hoop tension. That's the tension that holds the tank together. Is insufficient and these are typically based on, well, not typically, they are based on current seismic code. So when this was built, it was built to whatever the code was at the time, if there was even a code at the time. And it just simply doesn't meet current seismic code for what we know of earthquakes and the strength of earthquakes. So we have recommendations for that one that are also included in the CIP. And then the treatment plant, the towers and the other facilities there weren't constructed to current seismic code either. But what we have here is that to look more closely at the seismic, to conduct a full seismic evaluation. But we do have a CIP element in here, actually 2 of them, that is to replace and upgrade a lot of the facilities at the 2 treatment plants. And these things can all be, the current seismic code can be integrated into that. So it would kind of wrap those 2 together. But overall, from a seismic resiliency standpoint, I think the city is in good shape. So Mr. Mayor, the climate change vulnerabilities, this is what you were asking about. And the good news is you're on a groundwater system. The groundwater sources are obviously less vulnerable to acute climate changes. So that's the good news. However, they are slower to recover if there's a long chronic water shortage, because obviously those aquifers are filled from surface water. And as Milwaukee's neighbors using surface waters are looking to augment or diversify their sources of supply, if they go to the same aquifer and start to pumping, that's where you start to see some potential issues. So there's the risk of that. Now, some of the recommendations that we've employed is or recommended is to put a groundwater monitoring program in place. It's not critical. It's not like it has to be done in the next 2 years or the next 18 months or anything, but to put a program in place to monitor those groundwater levels. And are they going down? Are they staying steady so that you can make a plan? Maintain those redundant emergency supply agreements. Longer term, look at more water sharing possibilities. Maybe those aren't emergency interties, but again, that gets into a whole treatment aspect that if you're going to bring a surface water into your system, you're going to have to treat that water to make it match your groundwater so it doesn't upset the distribution system. Then the next is make the most of the water that you do have, and an aggressive proactive water conservation program. The city doesn't have one right now. A lot of cities have one, but they're not really too proactive or aggressive. And it can be hard to, I understand it can be hard to make that selling point to customers when, you know, if there isn't a water shortage, why are we conserving water? It's like, well, trying to play the long game here. Let's conserve the water while we do have it, since it is a groundwater source. It's not going to fluctuate rapidly to help not expand, but to prolong the source that we do have.
Well, and there have been quite a few residents who have been conserving water this summer in particular anyway, because they get the idea. I just wanted to ask a quick question about whether or not recharge efforts, like having rain gardens and those sorts of landscaping measures where you're really allowing the water to seep back into the ground, make any difference in restoring our particular aquifer?
At a utility and a municipality level like that, I would say no. If you're looking to recharge a system or recharge an aquifer, then what you're needing to do is to develop a recharge well. But what utilities in the area will do that are primarily a surface water will, during the winter months when they have excess capacity coming down the stream, they will pump that out and pump that into an aquifer and store that for the summertime. What you don't have in Milwaukee is you don't have that surface water system that you can use the capacity from to pump into the ground. So that kind of takes, you don't have that seasonal excess that surface waters do. So that makes it hard. You know, individual rain gardens and things like that, they're more of or rain barrels, they're more of a conservation tool than anything that is going to meaningfully recharge your municipal aquifers. And then finally, integrate some climate-related design standards into facility designs. Again, it's a kind of a conservation measure. You know, it's things like vegetated roofs, rain gardens, things like that. Anything that you can do to conserve that water and conserve the resource that you do have. So, any questions, Mr. Mayor, on the
Lisa had her hand up a couple of times.
I did. I had a couple questions and comments on the water conservation. I mean, we are a member of the Regional Water Providers Consortium, and they have a lot of conservation tools in terms of outreach materials, et cetera, videos, and, you know, they have umpteen and they translate a lot of them. So we do have some readily available to us if we want to do a conservation program. On the collection and injection into the groundwater, I think at one of those meetings, there was a presentation from Tualatin Valley, I believe, or Beaverton, which is doing that.
Yeah.
I think I sent everybody notes about that project. I wanted to ask you about the, you know, back to the slide where the mayor and you were talking about the costs of the, you know, a new reservoir and the pumping station.
Okay.
Yeah. I guess one question in my mind is if we invested in the new pumping stations, would that reduce the need for the new reservoir? And then the corollary question is if we have all these concerns, if we think we need a new reservoir and we have all these concerns about the Stanley Reservoir, is a better solution just a new, bigger reservoir at Stanley and decommissioning that one? So.
Yeah, and it's the short answer, and I'll expand on it. The short answer is it depends. The longer answer is that what needs to be balanced all there is first of all, property availability and acquiring the property to put the tank on. Since this is the way the system is set up now, you can't operate without Stanley Reservoir. So you can't decommission it and put a new reservoir in its place because you need it operational while the new one is being built. Hydraulically speaking, Stanley Reservoir is an elevated reservoir. So you would need, I mean, I think
Stanley's a ground reservoir, Brian.
What's that?
Stanley's.
Stanley, I'm sorry, that's right. Stanley is the ground reservoir. So that takes back my train of thought here. So yes, if the elevations work out and the hydraulics work out, then that's a possibility too. So it really becomes a land availability and where you have that land. Now, I'm not familiar with the Stanley site, Peter, if there's room to construct while Stanley remains in operation or not.
There is adjacent open space next to the reservoir, but it would have an impact on park. So
I mean, we're talking about, Stanley is now 1.5 million gallons, and we're recommending a 3 million gallon tank. So you're talking about a 4.5 million gallon tank. Should be roughly 3 times the size of the current Stanley.
Stanley's 3 million.
Stanley is 3 million. So, all right, so you're looking at a 6 million gallon tank. So that's a sizable size tank with the property that's going to be required for that. So certainly as part of this, we didn't get into siting, and I know that, the analysis is begin to generate, where will the city begin to look for property to construct this. So there's a lot of different things that can go into place. Now that we've identified the need for the storage, that analysis, really the next step, the analysis can take place as to how best do we put that storage or get that storage into the system. Is it a fourth tank? Is it, replacing Stanley with the larger tank? Is it a second tank on the Stanley site? There's a lot of different variables that can go into that now.
So that answer, I guess, sort of answered my first question, which was if we did the pumping, if we made the recommendations for improving the 2 pumping stations, would that change any of the calculations in your top chart of deficiencies or not really?
No, it wouldn't. The pumping is your ability to move that water around, and the storage capacity is really a calculation of 6 different elements of the type of storage that you need available for fire flow and pressures and emergency supply and operational demand. All those go into calculating the capacity that's needed. So they really don't impact one another.
Okay, thank you.
And I think, all right, so this is a highly summarized version of the CIP. We didn't want to hit you with, all of it and all the light items and the other ones, but based on category, the source of supply, we've identified 9 projects. Those include what were already in the CIP, the 5-year CIP, plus what we identified as part of this master plan, with a total planning cost of approximately $1.7 million. Treatment are the two projects of upgrading the two treatment sites. It comes to $3.2 million. The storage, the three projects, there's the new reservoir, the Stanley seismic upgrades, and the concrete reservoir relining. Comes to almost $9.8 million. The pumping upgrades are wrapped into 5 projects, come to about $4.3 million. The distribution, there's 36 projects, and I pointed at the top, these are the projects that we've identified right now over the next 10 years. It's not like these have to take place, like I said, in the next 18 months or the next 2 years. These are over a 10-year window, planning window here. There's 36 distribution projects. Those are primarily to resolve low fire flow issues. There's 4-inch pipe in the system. There's places that are dead ends that based on the demand and the capacity and the storage and the pumping where fire flow is low in those sections. So those are 36 different locations. That comes to a little over $18 million. The SCADA is, as I pointed out earlier, is kind of an ongoing thing. And that comes to an estimated $1.6 million, again, over the next 10 years. So that's with the current, again, those projects that were already identified that Peter had in the 5-year CIP, plus what we identified on through this master plan. And then some planning studies going forward. There's the new lead and copper rule that really kind of changes and puts some more onus on utilities as to where lead service lines exist in the system and how they need to be monitored. A compliance plan for that. That rule has been promulgated, so the city would now have 3 years to get into compliance with that. Certainly there's the master plan update at the end of the 10-year period. That seismic evaluation, system-wide seismic evaluation that we alluded to for beyond the reservoirs, but other parts of the system. There's tracking and maintaining and any water rights issues that might come up. That's a small item, but we put it in there. And then the climate change vulnerabilities, we recommended to Peter and his staff, and what you had alluded to, Mr. Mayor, is a more in-depth evaluation of the vulnerabilities to the system and to the water supply for the city that go beyond what's required in these master planning exercises. And with that, if there's any remaining questions, happy to try and answer. Or Peter, is there anything that you felt I missed there?
Nope. It looks like Councillor Heisey has a question.
Oh, yes.
And it's probably not really a question for you, Brian, but I'm thinking about the fact that we do have some ARPA money and wondering, because it looks like a lot, that's many millions of dollars and it's all important work. So I'm just curious if we can spend ARPA dollars on some of this to help defray the costs that will invariably have to be passed on to our ratepayers.
Yes. So this does qualify for ARPA money because it's a water system. That was one of the utilities that was allowed under that legislation. I'm not sure about the infrastructure package still. That has been mainly focused on transportation just because it was left out of the last piece of legislation. So at minimum, we would have some money that council has not dedicated. We're going to be coming back this winter to talk about those funds if this is where you would like to start investing some of that money.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Anyone else? I'm never good at seeing the little hand signs up in the corner. Anything else? All right.
Yeah, I don't see any either.
Okay.
So we got.
Thanks, Brian.
You bet. Thanks again, everyone, for allowing me to fill you in on where we are with this. And I think we'll be wrapping the whole thing up and getting the draft to the state probably within 4 to 6 weeks here. So it's always exciting when these things get done. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
I did briefly want to say, so Jen and I have been aggressively scrubbing the project list in that CIP. I think Brian actually got a little off track on the size of the reservoir. He said like a 6 million gallon tank, and that wasn't actually the case. I think it was more closer to like a 3.5 million is what he was recommending from the last time I talked to him. But we're sort of looking at that and identifying really what are our current needs and what are the triggers for a lot of these other development related improvements that are needed. So.
Okay. Thank you, Peter. Let's see. So our next item is the Kellogg Good Neighbor Committee dissolution. And I guess Councilor Heisey, Council President Heisey, are you presenting, or is Peter presenting?
This is Peter. I can pipe up, but Peter's the one who has put together a very nice presentation.
Awesome.
I have put together a presentation. So let me share the screen here. So once again, Mayor Gamba, Council President Heisey, and council members, I'm Peter Passarelli. I'm here this evening to talk about the recommendation from the Kellogg Good Neighbor Committee to dissolve the committee. And I put together a presentation to sort of highlight some of the accomplishments that the committee has made over the last, what is it, eight going on 8 to 9 years. And can everybody see that presentation?
No, we still see you.
No, still see me. Okay. I clicked the wrong thing. Okay, there we go. Okay. So I put together a presentation to sort of talk about the accomplishments and sort of outline why the committee made the recommendation and where we're headed. So let me turn this on. Good. Can everybody see that now?
Yep.
Perfect. Just a refresher on the committee. So, currently we have 5 members on the 7-member committee. Debbie Espinar is our chair, and she's a representative of Island Station. Heather Gates, Historic Milwaukie, and Heather actually has just gotten, I think, changed her name. Her last name, and Councilor Heisey, I don't know if you remember what her last name is now.
I keep forgetting it too, but she's very gracious about it.
She is. So, and she just had a baby. So, Shane is our at-large. Shane Abba is our at-large member. Michael Park's been a long time member of the committee representing Historic Milwaukie, and then Councilor Heisey is our council representative, and then we have a current vacancy from Island Station, and we've had a vacancy from our downtown business center that Neil Hankerson from Dark Horse used to represent, and then I serve as the liaison and for Milwaukie, and Greg Irely serves as the staff liaison for Wes. So I wanted to talk about some of the accomplishments that the committee has overseen over the last 8 years, and there's been a lot of great things and a lot of great efforts, and how that committee recommended to allocate the Good Neighbor dollars and how we've used those over the years. One of the big things was $1 million going to the park project. And I think primarily that went towards the dock, some of the work that was done at the dock at Milwaukie Bay Park. That $1 million that went to that park represents about $85,000 of the roughly approximately $135,000 that we get into that fund per year. So a little over 60% of that. There was a big odor control study that was done by CH2M Hill and some other consultants. And one of the resulting projects from that was, in particular, was the aeration basin covers that were put into the plant to cover the aeration basins to reduce the odors. Some of the other recommended projects from that study were the sort of the landscaping screen along the borders of the property to sort of reduce the wind flow and break up how the wind was going through the plant. That was one of the benefits of the landscaping work, as well as sort of the aesthetic work that was done to sort of cover and screen the plant from a 99E and the park. And it's really been, I think, a successful project. I think the odor control, the odor issues have gone significantly down. These do still exist from time to time, depending on the weather conditions and what might be going on in the plant. But I do feel, at least anecdotally from what we've heard from the committee over the time, that there's been a marked improvement there. And the committee's also been involved with improvements to the path lighting, the amenities in the park, the benches, the garbage cans. And then they've spent a lot of time working with Wes on the maintenance of the landscape items, the maintenance of signs and lighting within the park. And I think it's really provided the community a great amenity. It's a really nice park on the west side of the plant there. And the park is very well screened from the remainder of the community. So those are really some of the big accomplishments of the committee. I will say over the last, and Councilor Heisey, you can certainly correct me if I'm wrong, but at least over the last 2.5 years, we've really focused on maintenance issues in terms of sort of the landscape maintenance as sort of our focus in terms of where we wanted West to address. And I think the last several items in terms of recommendations to council on how to spend funds were related to replacement plannings and around the plant to replace plants and the vegetation that may not have had been properly established or were the wrong plants at the time. But so we spent really quite a lot of time on some of those maintenance issues. And
has all of that, I mean, I remember when that plan was brought to us a couple of years ago to, what to plant additional things to replace things that had not survived. Has all that planting happened?
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Peter.
I was going to say a significant amount of that planting has happened. And in fact, they're going even back in at our last meeting, Greg mentioned and pointed out several plants that didn't make it that they're going back to replant.
I was going to say, I just noticed walking it the other day. I don't walk on the trolley trail side that often, but I did the other day, and there's 2 dead conifers for sure on that side. Yeah.
And all of those plantings are under the 1-year warranty that came with that big landscaping project that council heard about and granted approval for. So that's already paid for, should be taken care of.
Yeah, so I think that the committee's really done a lot of great work. One of the things that we have struggled with over the years is even when we've had concerted efforts to recruit new members, we've struggled to get new members. We have had a hard time getting a new downtown business owner representative since Neil left. We do have some applications. I think we do have, currently we have 4 applications for the islands, for the vacant island station one. Some of them are new applicants. Some of them are also applicants that aren't necessarily eligible for that position because they may not live in they don't necessarily live in the city, or they've actually termed out already and haven't spent the time of the necessary time out of term before they're eligible again to sit on the committee. So it has been a struggle to get the committee fully staffed or fully formed, and as well as having productive meetings and discussions beyond the general landscaping things. A few years ago, I think in 2019, I think Greg Geist and Chris Story came to one of our council meetings and gave an update to council about Wes. And during that discussion, they spent some time discussing a model, a new good neighbor model that would allow for an expansion and use of funds in terms of use, as well as the geographical boundaries. And it has been, at times, I think it's been suggested perhaps that it could expand to include the entire community of Milwaukie, but that's not necessarily the case. That's something that still needs to be refined and defined. But what I did want to do is spend a little bit of time in talking about and reviewing that model that Greg and Steve had talked about in the past. So our current model, we get $1 per equivalent dwelling unit that's put aside into the Good Neighbor Fund per year. It's a monthly fee, a monthly charge. It's around $11,300 or so a month. We get about $135,000 a year. That number's slowly been increasing as development occurs. But Wes manages those funds. So the Good Neighbor Committee makes a recommendation on how to allocate those funds. That recommendation goes to council, to our city council, for concurrence or approval. And then once that happens, we pass that back over to Wes, and Wes would, in some cases, execute that. And in some cases, the city would in the past actually went through and executed a contract that Wes would pay. Those projects under our current IGA were limited to impacts within 200 yards of the plant. And I do have a slide coming up that shows you what that buffer looks like. And we were also able, under the current IGA, and this is the IGA from 2012, that established the service arrangement between, I think it was the Clackamas County Service District 1, now Wes, and Milwaukie on how wastewater was going to be treated, but it also established this Good Neighbor Fund. And then Wes is to also provide an annual report to the city. The new model, which is really based off of the model that Wes is using at their Tri-City plant with Oregon City and Gladstone. And I've got an asterisk on that, on the $1 per month per EDU. The funding mechanism with Tri-City is a little bit different than the $1 per EDU. They have a proportional breakdown between Gladstone and Oregon City based on the population. But I would anticipate, based on the previous discussions, preliminary discussions we've had with Wes in the past, that it would still we'd still maintain that $1 per EDU. But under the new model, we would manage the funds. The city would manage the funds. So we would get those dollars from Wes, and it would go into our own fund that we would manage and manage that project list. The boundary we would be able to expand. We would still need to have a process in place to make sure that we were prioritizing projects. Because it would be our fund to manage, I think it would go through, it would require to be budgeted, because it would be a fund that's underneath the city. So it would have to go through our budgeting process. And I would anticipate that, if those dollars would become part of our CIP project. So we would have interactions with our CUAB and our budget committee as those projects were going through the process. We would be required to actually report back to Wes on how we were using those funds, and Wes would want to sort of co-brand on those sorts of things. We would work with Wes and do a review every 5 years at a minimum of how the program's working. And then the funds would, if they weren't spent, we would need to go back to Wes to say, hey, we haven't spent these yet, but we've got a project that we want to spend them on, and we want to keep them in place. So those are some of the highlights of that, the differences between the two.
Yeah, and Peter, I just want to add that this is an IGA that has not yet been negotiated.
Right.
So what Peter's sharing is what Wes has done previously, and Peter and I had a conversation with Greg Geist a while ago where we talked about this, and Greg was really very kind and welcoming and said, we really want to come up with an agreement that works for you. We've learned a lot about how good neighbor agreements can go, thanks to the experience we've had with you guys. And we've done some things differently with our IGA around the Tri-Cities plant. So I think that the intent and expectation from Wes is to have a conversation about what will work for us. And since we do have these two neighborhoods that have historically been involved in a way that the Tri-Cities has not had, I think that we'll probably also want to ask for some things in there, like some way to ensure an ongoing direct line of communication between the plant and historic Milwaukie and Island Station neighborhoods. And, that could look like the plant manager comes to a certain number of neighborhood association meetings on an annual basis, or I don't know what it would look like, but I do feel like there are different expectations. So, this is a great overview of what was and what could be, but just know that because it hasn't been negotiated yet, we'll still see what comes out in there.
Well, I don't know if you have another slide. You said you had
I do. There we go. I've got a couple more slides. So I was just to show the boundary comparison. So on the left side of the screen is our Kellogg plant and aerial view, and the yellow line represents that 200-yard buffer. So under our current agreement, we're able to allocate, make recommendations to spend good neighbor funds on projects within that buffer zone. It does go into the Milwaukie Bay Park and into the Island Station neighborhood and into a little bit of the downtown and near the Kellogg Dam and sort of that southwestern part of our downtown. And then on the right side, what I'm showing you there is the good neighbor area, fun neighbor area that they've set up in this Tri-City IGA model. it's considerably a larger area, and yeah. So there, I wanted to make sure that there was the understanding that we'd be able to expand this, which in my mind makes sense, because when you look at that dollar per EDU, that dollar per EDU is coming from all of our wastewater customers in Milwaukee, not just the customers in historic Milwaukee or Island Station. So all of the customers in Milwaukee are paying into that Good Neighbor Fund through that EDU. Now, I on the other hand, conversely, not all those other customers are impacted by the proximity of the plant, but they are paying for it, and it does make some sense to, if they're paying into that fund, to see some benefits from those funds as well. So.
Well, I will say that the odors are much improved. There's no doubt about that, but odors are definitely still an issue. And there were 2 different weekends in this summer where I called the hotline and there's no recording. So the hotline that Wes operates is not functioning to the way it was supposed to function. It used to be that it was recording, it was a voicemail machine, and you left a message and you heard back on Monday, and it has not been taking messages. I don't know if you call during business hours, if people are there or not. But the odors are still an issue. So I am concerned about how far we broaden this area. I mean, I think it should be broader for sure than it is, because in fact, in some ways, it's the people on Lower Lake Road and on the backside of Kellogg Creek who often get more impact because of the way the wind is blowing. So this yellow line does definitely not include all the people who feel impacts from the plant. So I definitely think that needs to be revised. But I will be looking for something that still focuses on the impacts of the plant to the city.
Kathy, do you have your hand up for a comment or a question?
Yeah, and I'm sorry, by the way, that I often don't use that. When I'm looking at slides, I shrink it to the active speaker screen. So I'm not intending to be rude. I don't realize that anyone else is trying to speak. Anyway, I wanted to just say that I know that the conversation is going to spill over into what we want, but really I'm hoping that we can kind of keep this conversation focused a little bit more on the question of the committee and whether or not it's an appropriate fit for where we are at this time. And I wanted to also remind council that the last time we heard from Wes, I can't remember when that was. It was not that long ago. They shared with us a presentation, a video they'd put together that was about all of the improvements they've made at the Kellogg plant and the improvements that are yet to come. And there's still, I think, $300,000 left out of the $1 million in seed funds specifically for odor control. And they are going to be spending that money on additional odor control. And the other thing that will help is the dewatering treatment facility that they're putting in there, so that we'll have fewer transfers of sludge. Because when those sludge transfers happen, that's often when it gets really stinky, and we'll go from needing to do that several times a day to, a fraction of that. So I feel like, from my perspective, Wes has made it pretty clear that they are taking seriously their responsibilities around this, and they are making investments in the plant, which is not to say that we don't still need accountability for them, but I am really encouraged by the recent investments and the work they've done there.
Yeah, and to add on to that, to what Councillor Heisey said on the sludge piece, they do have a big sludge handling project that will significantly reduce the number of of trucks that will be hauling, I guess the biosolids that are produced at the plant. By dewatering them, they'll be able to reduce the number of trucks that go out there. So.
I will say that without question, making sure that hotline is working correctly is a priority. Sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you.
Okay. Peter, do you have more slides?
I do. I'm sorry. I just wanted to briefly go over, and this was in the staff report, the eligibility for projects for Good Neighbor funds. There's projects that make improvements, recreational improvements for pathways, parks, trails, enhancements to riparian areas. There's some public education as it relates to wastewater and surface water management that we can use the funds for, and the sort of the catch-all, perhaps other opportunities for collaboration to leverage resources, wastewater projects that both the city and West may be interested in, or other projects that West and the city might be interested in. So that's sort of like that catch-all there. I did just want to show you what they were doing and what they've indicated that they were interested in doing in Gladstone and Oregon City. They are related to trail connections, recreational trails, and wildlife viewing areas. Some of these items that impact recreation and making parks more accessible. There's some ADA accessibility projects that Gladstone's interested in. They're looking at doing some additional master planning in Oregon City, and then doing some maintenance in some adjacent parking lots and trails. So those are some of the types of projects that they're doing. And I indicated previously, these were some of the, they're getting $250,000 in the first year and splitting it 80-20 between the two communities. So.
Okay.
I think that was it on the questions or on the presentation that I had there. So.
Okay, I'd like to hear from Shane if possible. Hey, good to see you.
Good to see you.
And can we switch to full screen view rather than slide view? Sorry.
Yeah, let me get out of that. I will stop sharing. There we go.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. It's good to see everyone again. It's I have to feel a little bad for you because it's a beautiful sunny day and you're doing this work session. And I remember those days, but in any event, I believe that the Kellogg Good Neighbor Committee is a bit of a victim of its own success, and it has done some great things. The hard thing about following Peter in a presentation is he's so comprehensive that he's said everything that I would have said. And he did a great job, I think, of discussing the accomplishments that have occurred through the life of this committee. However, I will tell you that as someone who served both as the city council liaison and now currently as the at-large member, the agendas were getting very small, and the agendas were mostly about landscaping and plant replacement. And that was a recurring theme, which is important for that area, but I don't know that it warrants a full-on city committee to meet to discuss landscaping. And I know that this committee has struggled to find applications and members. So I think that's a bit of a concern. The idea of modeling this under what Wes is doing with Oregon City and Gladstone, I think it expands the use of these funds, both the proximity and the type of use for them. So I fully support it. I was on the committee voting to recommend this to the city council, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have, but I think Peter has really, he's teed it up pretty well.
Okay. And that was a unanimous decision of the members present?
It
I
was.
believe there was one absent. So it was unanimous of those who were present, and I believe one was missing.
Yeah, I was around when we established this committee, and to tell you, to be brutally honest, I think to some degree it was a mechanism to solve a problem that we are still trying to solve, which is to pay to get Milwaukie Bay Park built out. And it has done, I think, amazingly more good. I too served on it as the council liaison for a while after the mayor came off. It's done a lot more good than I think was even anticipated when we started the committee. I do believe it's you know, the landscaping project that occurred was good. The work we did on establishing where the smells were coming from was good. It helped focus Wes a little bit. And so I think we've seen more improvements than we might have otherwise sooner. And I think that the projects that are yet to come will finish out what we learned in that study. So I don't think when we established this, we expected this to be a permanent committee. I think we wanted to solve the problem of the plant stinks and solve the problem of we need to get this park started. And to a great degree, we've done those things. So I'm not, I don't see why we should be taking staff time and all of the rigmarole that goes with a full committee continuing forward either.
Unless anyone has any questions of me, I will head off. But I did want to just jump in. And also, I should share that I had a friend who's not really familiar with Milwaukie that was visiting me recently. We went down there. And she commented about, wow, look at this, how beautiful this is, this little park you have. And it's right there on the river and the landscaping. So who would have said that 10 years ago? Hardly, right? So that was good to hear from her, because she's not familiar with anything in the past, but she thought it was a lovely area.
Thank you, Jane, for sure. Yeah, my words aren't working. Thank you for joining us, Shane. I appreciate having someone from the committee who wasn't just me come and join us.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks.
I want to make sure the person who wasn't there was not the sole Island Station neighborhood rep?
Was not.
Was not. Okay.
And I'm actually not sure that they are any longer a resident of the city. They may have moved away. It has been exceedingly difficult to get people for this committee. I did not know from Peter that we had any viable applications. I pounded the pavement and worked hard to get the people that are currently serving. Thank you again, Shane. And I begged at neighborhood association meetings, both my own and Historic Milwaukie. I went to the Downtown Milwaukie Business Association. I talked to individual businesses. It has been difficult. And I know that these things have ebb and flow to them, but it has been difficult the entire time I've been on this committee. And I do feel like that is a measure of community engagement in the work. And I can't imagine a more compelling thing than, hey, guess what? You get to help us figure out how to spend money. And still, I just could not, I had a very hard time recruiting folks to apply. So they have done wonderful work. I'm very grateful that we have this little jewel down by the river, and the dedication of that original committee is who we really have to thank for that. Yeah, I think we have a new opportunity. We can kind of turn the page and do some new work with this, I think.
All right. Unless there are more questions, we are well into what we usually take for a break. I think we're going to hold off on the executive session till next week or next meeting. It's apparently not 2 weeks. Yeah, it's apparently not as urgent.
It's not urgent, and I think I'll need a 15-minute break.
Yeah. So everybody enjoy your 15 minutes, and I will see you back at the regular session.